Welcome to our interview session. It is so great to see you. I'm Mazuki, and I have been looking forward to this particular session today. So again, welcome. I'm so glad that you are here. And just give me some comments so that I know, just type in hi or something so that I know that you are here with me. It's so exciting that we have this topic today, and I hope that you will gain the maximum benefit from this session today. We have Rajen in a short while. I will be inviting him into the studio. Rajen Devadason. He's talking about failing, surviving, or thriving. He is coming from the perspective of financial management, personal financial management, or even corporate financial management. So if you want to ask him questions regarding that, once we start the interview going, just you can go ahead and do that. So really excited about what we are going to have. Now, throughout this session, if you have any comments or questions, just key in the comment section, and we will be monitoring those. And what we'll do is, when appropriate, I will be taking those comments or questions and bringing it to Rajan's attention. So if you have any questions, feel free to comment below. So right now, just comment in with a hi or hello or good morning. It's a wonderful morning as I'm sitting here. I'm hearing the rain outside, and I just go, wee, I love the rain. It's so refreshing. Oh, Ines, so glad that you are here all the way from Brazil. Wow, Ines, it's been quite some time that we've met. So glad to see you here. And Bhavani, good morning. Happy that you're here. We had a late night with the session yesterday evening. Oh yes, Ines, sorry, it's night time over there. So I hope Homulo will also be joining us, Ines. Or are you watching it together? Good. So excited. And as I mentioned just now, I wonder if it is also raining where you are at, Bhavani. I can hear the refreshing sounds of rain outside. So Rajan is no stranger to you, Bhavani, and of course, Ines. Rajan will be speaking in the area of personal and corporate finance. So when I invited him for this, thank you, Ines. I'm just laughing when you mentioned that Homulo is on bed already. Rajan will be speaking in the area of corporate and personal finance, and to me that's very useful. Yeah, it's very useful because everybody's affected in some way or the other with respect to finances. So this session is really relevant. It's very relevant to me, and I do believe that it will be relevant to you as well. So we're coming up in a minute. We'll be bringing Rajan into the onto the screen, so he's ready to be here. So good morning, Rajan. How are you?
Hey, hi, Mazuki. So am I also saying hi to, is it Inez, and also to Bhavani, my good friend?
Yes, so they are here as well with us starting this session. So welcome everyone. Rajan, welcome to this interview series on going beyond survival to long-term sustainable holistic wealth. And when when I had this idea for this interview series, it's about uh, uh, noticing that when this pandemic came, each and every one of us experienced it differently. The analogy that someone, I don't know who was the one who started off the analogy saying that we are in the same storm, however, we are in different boats. And I smacked my head. I said, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a
Just
quote that you hope you're the one who actually came up with it, but now all of us are using it. We're all in different boats.
yeah, we are in different boats. So that's why I've invited you to come in here, because especially during a crisis such as this, we need information to move forward. Now, in today's day and age, the tragedy is that because we are bombarded with so much information, there is also misinformation and disinformation out there. And because of that, some people who are already in rickety boats, and because they rely on misinformation, they might end up in the sea. And that's very dangerous. So that's why I came up with this interview series. What if I were to bring in experts from various backgrounds and let people be exposed to expert knowledge, expert opinion? In that way, we are able to take action based upon the right information. So that's why I'm so glad that you have agreed to be here, so generous with your time to being here, so that today we are able to get into your head, learn as much as we can from the area of personal finance and also corporate finance. So the tagline that my daughter suggested for this particular interview series, because when I mentioned that I'm inviting experts from various backgrounds to inform people about the impact of the crisis from their particular expertise. So my daughter mentioned that, so it's about valuable people sharing valuable information. And I like that, because disinformation, misinformation can get us into a lot of trouble. So that is why I'm so excited that we have this discussion today on failing, surviving, or thriving. That sounds, the first part sounds really ominous, failing. And Jack Ma mentioned that you want to at least survive, be focused on survival. Now, if we are focused on survival and we are not focused on thriving after the crisis, then we may miss opportunities. So that's why I'm so glad, Rajen, that you are here. So yes, over the few days that we have been communicating via email, every day I become more and more excited, looking forward to this session with you. So let me begin here, Rajen. Every country in the world is facing an economic slowdown because of the pandemic. This has meant most people are making no money or less money than before the crisis. At the same time, there are also some people who are doing better than before, or at least expect to power through this recession and end up wealthier. So why is that? The different fortunes that people are experiencing. So over to you, Rajan.
Thanks, Mazuki. I think one of the most important things we have to understand is that even though this particular COVID-19 crisis is something that none of us has actually gone through, the last time the world had a global pandemic was the 1918-1919 Spanish flu. And, pretty much all of us were not around at that time. So I think what's really important to understand is that there will be many things about this particular crisis, and we are still smack dab in the middle of it. There will be many things about it that are very different from other crises. And we're still trying to learn, we're still trying to feel our way through. For the economies that have shut down, we're trying to figure out how on earth are you supposed to take advantage of the opportunities that you have, and how do you actually move from just barely hanging on to actually thriving? So because the specifics for the virus or the virus-driven pandemic will be specific, I think, the specifics will be different for the pandemic. I think what's more useful is for us to actually cast our minds back to the lessons that we have seen from various other crises as well. When you look at the broad sweep of human history, you'll remember that civilizations rise and civilizations fall. And when that happens, another civilization rises and then it falls as well. But when it comes to a specific economy, what we find is that markets, be they stock markets or bond markets, or at Main Street level, the retail market, these things rise and fall and rise and fall and rise and fall. Nothing's going to change. We're going to continue for a long, long time. For the last many decades, lots of people have noticed a very specific periodicity. It seems to be that every decade or so, something goes wrong and then something goes right. So I think it's actually helpful for us to cast our minds back and look at let's say, just the more recent crises. Now, I was born in 1964, so I'm 56 years old. So I'm old enough to have been around and been directly involved in markets for quite a while. But even if I go back to just my childhood, I remember, obviously after the fact, reading about the OPEC oil crisis in the early 1970s, around about 1973. And then I won a scholarship to do my A-level. So I was in London from 1982. I only returned in 1989, finished my A-levels degree and worked for a bit. So while I was away from Malaysia during most of the 1980s, my father, my late father, wrote and he told me things are terrible. And the thing is, my father was always saying things are terrible. So I took that with a grain of salt. But when I came back, I realized, he was absolutely right, because Malaysia actually went through this massive commodity crisis, and that hurt us enormously. And then I got back in 89. By the time I started working in Malaysia, it was 1990. And then obviously, for those of us, not just in Malaysia, but throughout Asia, we went through the Asian financial crisis, which started in 1997 and stretched all the way through to 1998. And then, of course, recovery came. And in the US, things were like really boom with the dot-com bubble of 1999. But in March 2000, the dot-com bubble burst. That came down, and then America recovered, and then sadly 9/11 hit, and the whole world was basically thrown into turmoil. The world has not been the same since. But we recovered, and then we ended up with the global financial crisis, which really began in the third quarter of 2007. But the vast majority of us didn't really understand that anything was wrong with the global economy until 2008. So for us, it was 2008, 2009. And things went down, they picked up again, and now we're facing this particular pandemic. So what's really important is that if you go back and you look at the cause of each of these different crises, each one is different. But there is a tremendous common denominator that is shared by the people who went through each different crisis, came through, and actually survived. So I think we're going to spend quite a lot of time talking denominators. Just before I stop, most of us, when we were in school, we learned about the sine wave or the cosine wave. We talk about. And then if you go deeper into that, maybe at college or university, you also learn about what's known as a sinusoidal wave, which basically goes up and down, up and down, up and down. And what's very, very interesting is that when you look at investment markets over the long period, you'll find that there does seem to be a certain sinusoidal aspect to it. And right
Okay.
now, we're at a trough. And what we're
Mm-hmm.
going to be looking at is, will recovery come? And I
Mm.
would say definitely yes. Will the world go into a depression? Maybe. But I believe that those who are reasonably prepared for it don't need to be excessively fearful. However, a lot of the advice that I will be extending this day um, may seem to some people to be a case of closing the barn door after the horse is bolted. So
Okay.
what I want to point out is this: even if you're not in the best financial shape to prosper through this particular crisis, then what you want to do is to try and survive. And
Mm.
when things start to improve, whether it be 6 months from now, or a year from now, or 2 years from now, things will improve. When they do, take to heart some of the principles that will be shared today and really begin to reorganize your financial life so that when the next crisis hits, and trust
Mm.
me, the next crisis will hit, whether it'll be 5 years from now or 10 years from now, I don't know what it is, but
Mm.
chances are it's going to be a very different kind of crisis. And it's going to probably going to be called a black swan. It's going to be triggered by what's called a black swan event, which means nobody saw it coming. But regardless of what the catalyst for the next crisis might be,
Mm.
this is now 2020, so maybe we're looking at, I don't know, 2029, 2030, 2031. I don't know. But you want to get prepared so that when you go through that crisis, you really come through the other side extremely prosperous.
Mm. Okay, that's very interesting because as you mentioned about the various uh, the various crises that we have gone through in the past, depending on our experience, we experience it differently in the sense that because as you were mentioning it, then I begin to notice. Before that, I wasn't really noticing it because I don't know, maybe there was some cushioning that was happening that I didn't really notice those things happening. So as you are mentioning that, then I begin to notice the you mentioned the denominator. You the sinusoidal wave. Then I begin to notice. Okay, yeah. So that's very interesting. So you mentioned about those denominators. So I'm really interested. However, before we go to that, um, this current crisis, there are some people who are already comparing it with the American Great Depression of the 20s. So that's the kind of uh, intensity that this current crisis holds in store for us. So when I hear that kind of comparison, I go into my panic room because I've never experienced that kind of crisis before. So when people make those comparisons, so how does that sit in with your observations?
I think there's a reasonably high possibility that we will go into a depression.
Mm.
However, I am convinced that if we do, for sure, we're going to go into a recession. That's guaranteed.
Mm.
Um, Interestingly enough, if you were to actually Google the definition of a depression, um, what you will find is that there is no hard and fast definition.
Mm.
Recession is very clear. You hit a technical recession in a particular country, you hit a technical recession if you have two consecutive quarters of negative growth.
Mm.
So if you end up in a situation where a particular country, let's say, has for say Q1 has 4% growth,
Mm.
Q2 is minus 1% growth,
Mm.
Q3 it's got plus 1% growth, no recession because it hasn't hit two
Okay.
consecutive quarters of negative growth, of contraction. But there is no official definition of a depression. But I've been writing on financial planning and economics for a very, very long time. And obviously, over the years, you're always casting about for ideas. So in the past, I've actually done some research on this, and I have found that while there is no clear definition, people generally believe that if you end up with an extremely deep recession, where in a single year the economy contracts by more than 10%, or over an extended number of years, say over 3 years or 5 years, etc., from top to bottom, the contraction is 20% or 30%, etc., then for sure you're in a depression. So I believe it's possible that we will go into a depression. However, I am absolutely convinced that this depression caused by the pandemic will be relatively short-lived. And I will explain why.
Okay.
The virulence of the COVID-19 virus it's both extremely high and extremely low. The level of infection, the infectiveness, if you like, is extremely high. So it spreads like wildfire.
Yeah.
But thank God, the mortality rate is very, very low.
Oh, okay.
So you've got the medical side of things.
Mm.
And depending on which country you're looking at, right now on a global basis, based on the identified number of cases and the number of fatalities, it looks as though the mortality rate has been creeping up to the 6 to 7% range.
Okay.
But the thing that you must understand is that many people, and you never know, maybe you and me, we don't know, many people are actually asymptomatic, which means they are actually carrying the virus, but they don't feel sick. And if you look at the relative numbers from country to country, and you do a little bit of extrapolation, it is conceivable that the number of people truly infected could be as high as 10 times more than the number of official infected individuals that we have.
Okay. Okay.
Because of the asymptomatic
Yes.
population,
Yeah.
if that is true, then what happens is the true mortality rate won't be 7%. It actually drops to 0.7%.
Yeah.
So whatever it is, we let the authorities deal with it. But what's really crushing economies is not the virus. It is actually our reaction to the virus.
Yes.
We do have no choice. We're shutting down economies. And as a result of that, people can't work. But economies have to open up. Already, countries that have shut down are talking about creating bubble corridors. And the most important bubble corridor for people in our part of the world is definitely the Malaysia-Singapore corridor. We've got to get that border open. We've got to make sure that there is communication and that there is travel back and forth. Once that happens, both Malaysia's economy and Singapore's economy will pick up because we are mutually the most important trading partner
Okay.
or income source of work. Very, very important. You look at the Baltic states, and I think 3 countries have actually already opened up a corridor. So this has to be done slowly. But unless open up as quickly as is safe, we're going to end up with a truly, truly terrible depression. And I don't think that is necessary. Because I believe that governments, by and large, are going to act responsibly once the negative numbers start coming through. They will find it is actually well within their scope of reaction and pro-reaction, being active, reactive, and proactive to actually do something about it. So I think if we go into a depression, and I don't want us to go into a depression, don't get me wrong. If we do, I will be very surprised if it's longer than a year and a half.
Okay, so in a year and a half, a lot of people are going to be in a lot of pain. I don't know the unemployment numbers here in Malaysia. However, in the States, it's already 38 million people. That's the whole population of Malaysia already.
It's more than that. We are 32.
Yeah. So the people who are badly affected, they are going to suffer over this 1.5 year period. So I'm just curious about what's the difference between the people who, when this crisis hits, they just spiral down and they come out worse off, and the people who, when the crisis hits, they are able to go upwards. I was just reading, I think yesterday, one of the owners of an online, I can't remember the name of that. In China, you have Alibaba and all that, but there's another one that has suddenly shot up. He's the third or the fourth billionaire in China now. So you have those kind of people who come out winners. Sorry?
Are you talking about Tencent?
Tencent has shareholding into that into that company. It is quite similar to Alibaba. However, their focus is more into the rural, the smaller towns and cities. So he's now officially the third or the fourth wealthiest man in China, and that came out of the crisis. So you mentioned about the common denominators of rare economic winners. So we have this crisis right now. So what are these common denominators, so that we can learn from these people, even if, as you mentioned, our financial fortunes were to suffer in this 1 or 2 years, at least we can keep an eye, so that when we begin to go up on the rebound, then we begin to move forward, moving further ahead.
I'm going to answer this in two parts. The first and the shorter portion, the first and the shorter portion will pertain to companies. Many companies are tanking. Just in Malaysia alone, it's heartbreaking. The number of hotels that are closing, the number of restaurants that are closing. It's just really, really sad. But at the same time, the experience in Malaysia is that certain sectors of the economy have actually done very, very well. For instance, our rubber glove makers, which were already the biggest in the world, are now becoming hyper dominant. So it's amazing. I think the most important word that must be taken to heart by business people is pivot. P-I-V-T. We have to be willing to pivot. We need to be able to turn. We need to be able to move. We need to stay neutral. Now, most of the people, I believe, who would be watching this are conventional employees who might harbor a dream of one day starting a business. And also they might be business owners, but chances are they are owners of small businesses, because quite frankly, if you look at the entire food chain, as it were, most businesses are small businesses. So statistically, I think it's safe to say that it's the small business person who's listening to us. So I think one of the most important things we can actually do is to make sure that we ourselves as individuals stay sensitive and stay nimble, so that we can be thoroughly committed to our business. We may love our business, but if our business suddenly disappears, it suddenly evaporates, that doesn't mean there is nothing that we can do to earn money. You see, the global economy is in a very, very sweet spot right now. And I believe it's going to remain in that sweet spot at least until the year 2100. We're only at 2020. So for the rest of our lives, for everybody listening, we're actually in really good shape. Explain what I'm saying. In the year 1900, the world had 1.6 billion people. By the time we swung up to the year 2000, we were at maybe 6 billion or a little bit more. So in the span of 1 century, the global population almost quadrupled. The global population right now oscillates, it's not oscillates, it is actually growing, and it is between 7.7 and 7.8 billion people. By the end of this year, we will probably have 7.8, or if not, it'll be early next year. And then we will hit 8 billion, then we'll hit 9 billion. The best estimates I've been able to find with regard to the likely population in the world in the year 2050, 2050, is roughly 9.5 or 9.6 billion people. And by the time we hit the year 2100, the global population is likely to be between 10.5 billion and 11 billion. And then, because of the aging of society and because of the drop in the human reproductive rates, the numbers are going to start coming down. So in the 22nd century, the sweet spot that we are enjoying in the 21st century will pass. And so our great-grandchildren are not going to be able to reap the same kind of economic dividends that we can. But there will be other things they can do, and you never know. By that time, long before that time, maybe in the next 20, 30, 40 years, the wealth of the world, our planet, is actually going to be augmented by the work done throughout the solar system. I mean, there are already there's very clear talk about going back to the moon, not just to visit, but to actually set up a base. Elon Musk is constantly talking about going to Mars. Whether he does or not, we will see. But really, what's of great importance is the mining of the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. And over the next 30, 40, 50 years, there will be the development of a mining community which will actually flow resources and, as a result of that, wealth back to Earth. So these are tremendously exciting times. This, of course, assumes that mankind actually can get its act together and not waste money on war, but actually comes the saber rattling that you hear right now with Donald Trump constantly pointing to China, I think, is incredibly unhealthy. One of the biggest problems the world has right now is a lack of genuine leadership. We've got a leadership crisis in the White House. We've got a leadership crisis in our country. We've got leadership crisis in many, many countries. But the people who really need to get the work done are the real people. If we look to the politicians to try and come up with some kind of solution for us, it's not going to happen. I mean, we've had decades of watching politicians, and it just seems like the caliber and the quality keeps going down. But the ability that we have to actually take charge of our own destiny, I think that is tremendous. Now, let me just say that as far as businesses are concerned, they need to be able to pivot. The business owners need to be constantly learning. They need to constantly look for opportunities. I mentioned Elon just now. Now, when Tesla had to shut down or slow down its production, and when it became very clear that America was going to be incredibly badly hit by the pandemic, America's actual deaths right now has already crossed 100,000 people. I was reading something the other day, yesterday, I think, which says that the number of American deaths just from the pandemic has actually been higher than maybe for the last 2 or 3 skirmishes, wars, as in American presence, let's say in places like Afghanistan, Iraq, etc. And so this is a really big deal. Malaysia, we've been very, very fortunate. I believe our total deaths thus far have been about under 120, not 120,000, but 120 people. Now I grieve for the 120 families that have been affected, but we are so fortunate. We have Ines or Ines, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce your name.
Ines.
I'm sorry. Ines. Okay. So Ines is from Brazil. And I remember reading the news about Brazil about 2 months ago, thinking, my goodness, this is going to be a powder keg. And unfortunately, I was right. The Brazilian death numbers have been skyrocketing. So there has to be leadership in individual countries to do a good job. So as far as individual businesses are concerned, you need to be able to pivot. In the case of Elon Musk, when the level of production of cars came down, Tesla, he actually revamped the production line, and Tesla was actually able to come up with ventilators. And it wasn't a business decision; it was a case of I'm a responsible corporate leader. I'm a responsible corporate entity. There is a need, and I will come in and I will make a difference. And but when it comes to very, very good business people, if you are in the business of manufacturing one thing, then if that demand for that one thing disappears, are you able to pivot and move on to
Mm-hmm.
something else. As long as you can remain nimble, the fact that the global population continues to grow and grow and grow between now and the year 2100, we've got very steady growth, and we've got much faster growth between 2020 and 2050. This generation, the next 30 years, we are going to harvest tremendous demographic dividends. It's amazing. Just from an investment perspective, that means that if you're going to be investing in companies, you should be looking at equities, because the number of people consuming things will be rising. If you're investing in commodities, commodities represent the stuff of life. More and more people means that people are going to have to buy more and more stuff. There is going to be demand. So that's exciting from a corporate perspective. Now, from an individual perspective, what is very important is um, you talk about the Great Depression from 1929. In the US, I think the US came out of the Great Depression in 1938. The rest of the world, I think, in 1939. It was the jump starting of the manufacturing engine, as it were, because of the beginning of World War II, that pulled the world out of the Great Depression. Now, the people who survived that decade and actually did very, very well, the people who went through the OPEC crisis, the people who went through the commodity crisis of the 80s, the people who went through the Asian financial crisis of the 90s, the global financial crisis, and the people who are going through this particular crisis, the two common denominators that distinguish those who are failing or barely surviving and those who are thriving are they have low or no debt. Low debt or no debt. That's number one. And number two, they have large EBFs, emergency buffer funds. An EBF is a cushion account or a reserve account of cash. It is not a bank line of credit. It is your own cash. And the guidelines are, under normal circumstances, the guidelines are individuals who are conventionally employed should actually have emergency buffers of between 3 and 6 months expenses. People like me, people like you, Mazuki, those of us who run our own businesses, we should have emergency buffers of between 6 and 12 months expenses. And I've given this a lot of thought, particularly through observing companies that have collapsed and companies that are doing okay. Let's look at the hotels that are shutting down. If the owners of the hotels are carrying a lot of debt, they cannot service those loans. Those hotels that are actually able to shut down right now just to stay safe so that their rooms are not infected, and who are planning to reopen, whether they reopen in July or in August, or some Malaysian hotels are looking to reopen next month in June. These are the ones that actually are carrying zero debt, or they got very, very low debt and large reserves. So my view is that if you are already a business person, you may want to act in a very counterintuitive way, and you actually want to build very, very large cash reserves, enough to be able to sustain your company and its plans and its payroll. Ideally, you don't want to be firing anyone. At a time when all your competitors are letting people go, you want to be in a position to be able to cherry pick the very best people, because people are the ones who will make your company grow. Yes, of course, automation and robotics is very, very important, but it is the ability of people. You want to get the best people you can. And most companies right now are basically hunkering down because they are terrified of failure. They're in survival mode. But there are a few companies that are saying, I can become bigger and I can become better at this time. And so for a company to put in place an emergency buffer of pure cash, sitting in a money market fund or sitting in a series of bank fixed deposits, whatever it may be, that will cover 12 to 24 months expenses, may come across to most business people listening to me right now as being incredibly impractical. And you're right, it is very, very tough. But there are some companies in the world that are actually doing it. You don't think it's an accident, do you, that the world's greatest investor, Warren Buffett, is sitting on a cash pile of more than 100 billion US dollars. And that's simply because he has created this, he called it a canvas. His corporate vehicle is Berkshire Hathaway. And Berkshire Hathaway is actually an aggregation and agglomeration, if you like, of excellent companies. And these companies, even in bad times, are able to keep pumping money back to the holding company. And so Buffett's been collecting cash, but he's been looking around and he's had real trouble trying to figure out where to go and invest. Now, things are a lot cheaper than they were at the peak a little while ago, but it's also possible that as corporate news, as bad corporate news for Q2 and Q3 this year come forth, that investment markets may come down. And if you're already holding cash from an investment perspective, it makes sense. But again, the key denominators for those who will survive are individuals or companies, low or no debt, and large EBS. Too bad if right now, as you go through this crisis, you are not in that position. That's perfectly all right. But this crisis will not last forever. And I don't think it's going to last that long. When we come through and things start to pick up again, can you focus on paying down your debts as aggressively as you can? Can you focus on building emergency buffers as large as you possibly can, so that when the next crisis hits, you will be in much better shape than the person next door, than the company next door?
Wow. So that's very very insightful for me. Those two, what you call twin common denominators, because that will make us more resilient when the next crisis comes. So as you were saying that, I'm making a mental note here is that as I go out of this crisis, I want to work towards that. Work towards low debt and a large EBF. So that's what I want to work towards. So for those who are in this current crisis, they are in debt and they are already out of their the emergency fund is already gone. So what are the things that they can do in order to survive right now? So that as they survive this crisis, they can begin to go into those points that you mentioned just now. So what is it that they can do right now?
Work. If you've lost your job, get another job. If one job is not enough, get 2 or 3 part-time jobs. There is basically, there's no shortcut as far as this is concerned. For regular people, what we require is activity that will allow us to contribute to the world so that we can actually work. Many years ago, when I was working as a journalist for Malaysian Business Magazine, this was actually the second proper job that I landed after I came back from England in late '89. The first job was actually with TV3. I was a cadet broadcast journalist, but I only stayed there 17 days, and then I left. And, I came around and I got an offer for radio in Singapore, but I actually joined Malaysian Business Magazine, which was part of the New Straits Times group. And I remember in 92, 93, around about that time, I won an award for business journalism, and the part of the prize was a cash prize. I was very happy. And there was also a ticket to Vietnam. So I flew to Vietnam and I spent a few days there. I was in Ho Chi Minh City, which used to be called Saigon, the commercial center of Vietnam. And so this is in the early 90s. And I was astounded to find that there were very many Vietnamese who actually had full-time jobs during the day. And in the evening and at night, they had either 1 more or 2 more part-time jobs. I mean, I'm talking about really humble activity, like sitting on the side of the road and selling vegetables. I have a multi-millionaire client who was not a millionaire when we started working. He actually was in debt, and we worked together, and he got himself out of it. And when he was still working in Malaysia, he's now working in the Middle East. When he was working in Malaysia as a pilot for MAS, during his off days, he actually would set up an ikan bakar store. He lived in Port Dickson. So he actually has an ikan bakar store, and he and a friend were actually just testing it out. Now, he didn't do that for very long, but he tried. He tried. We really found that people who are not so caught up in their own sense of self-importance, who are willing to do whatever it takes, will work and will work very hard. Make no mistake about this, okay? These are tough times. And it's going to be very difficult for many of us to be able to pay down our debt in an accelerated basis and to build emergency buffer funds if we're only working 40 hours a week. I'm talking about hunkering down and working 50 hours, 60 hours, 70 hours, 80 hours a week. Those of us who run our own business, we know what it is to work hard, very, very, very hard. But for those who've actually just been coasting along thinking the government will take care of me, all of that is nonsense. In the Malaysian context, from a structural perspective, oil prices are likely to stay low. The political turmoil and tumult that we've actually gone through recently has, added to the polarization, the racial polarization in the country. But for the people who have a massive entitlement mentality in Malaysia, all I'm going to say is all the best, because the government doesn't have very much money. And quite frankly, with oil revenues coming down, you're going to have to help yourself. So because it's been a very uneven playing field in Malaysia for decades, pretty much since about 1970, 1971, and things have got progressively worse from decade to decade, those who have felt at the short end of the stick, as it were, have realized that they can only rely on themselves, and they have actually worked harder and harder and harder. That group of individuals is actually going to do very well right now. Whereas the people who are comfortable just sitting back and expecting the government to help them, they're going to have to reorganize themselves.
I like that definition that you gave about work. You just went off like that, but you mentioned about work is the activity that we can contribute to the world. And my own personal observation is that when people don't have that kind of outlook towards their own work, that's when they demean their work. So that's when they just want to rely on things going on. They do not see that the work is about contributing something that is valuable to the world. So I like that definition very well. So what you're saying right now is that no matter how low it is financially that you are experiencing, just to be looking into what value that I can contribute to the world and just do that. Even you gave the example of that pilot going for ikan bakar. By all means, going for ikan bakar, even though it doesn't jive with society's esteem of what a pilot does and what an ikan bakar seller is.
Absolutely. You don't want to get trapped inside your own arrogance. And again, because I'm speaking mainly to Malaysians right now, I want to just point out something. I gave you the demographic trends between now and 2050 and then on to 2100. Something else that you also want to do, for those of you who have children, is to also realize that learning has to be a lifetime activity. For those of us who are, shall we say, older than average, older than the average in the median age in our respective countries, and Malaysia is a young population. Because I'm 56 years old now, I just realized I'm actually almost double the median age of Malaysia. I think the median age of Malaysia right now might possibly be 30 or 31. We have a relative, and it's going to keep growing. But you got to look at the way the world is changing, and you got to channel the educational initiatives for your children to guide them in the right places. So think about it. If your children are not proficient in English, make sure that you get them the very best education possible. They must know English. They must know, especially for kids now, they must know Mandarin. to go around the world effectively, if you want to be able to compete worldwide, you need English, you need Mandarin. Demographically speaking, knowing Spanish as well may be incredibly helpful. Now, Inez is in Brazil and they speak Portuguese there, but the rest of Latin America basically speak Spanish.
Yes.
Those three languages are crucial. And if your kids only have the limited ability to pick up lots of languages, then you want to drop the languages that have no economic value. I'm very cold-blooded as far as that is concerned, and I'm probably going to end up getting lots of very angry mail saying great cultural value and stuff. And all I'm saying is, look, the world is tough, and it's going to get tougher. So wake up to that fact. I want to give people practical advice right now. If you're currently you're currently working 40 hours a week, over the next 12 months, I want you to ramp up the number of hours that you work to 50 or 60. If you're currently working at 50 or 60 hours, ramp up to 55 or 65. Don't try not to go beyond maybe 75 or 80, because then life just can fall apart. But I think we've had it far too easy for far too long. The world is tough; it's going to get tougher. And one of the reasons that the advice that I have given with regard to getting rid of debt, go low debt or no debt, is going to be very difficult for people to heed, is because it runs counter to the way that our society looks at the world. For many, many decades now, the leaders of almost every country have worshipped at the altar of the almighty GDP, gross domestic product. Now, GDP is a fantastic economic metric, and it adds up the value of the flow of goods and services in an economy in 1 year. And if your GDP continues to grow year to year, your economy is deemed to be healthy. Now, for many decades now, particularly since I think the break actually took place when President Nixon in March 1971 took the US dollar off the gold standard. But I really think it's from the 1980s onward that global GDP has hinged upon the expansion of credit. In other words, people borrow money, they can take that money and buy stuff. When they take money and buy stuff, then the flow of goods and services actually increases. So our entire world is actually built on a debt bubble. The central bankers of the world are kicking the can down the road, and no one really knows what's going to happen if the bubble bursts. But they've been saying this for decades, so maybe it won't burst. I don't know. But what I do know is that when you have economies that are built on debt, the economies themselves become far more volatile. Because of that volatility, you have opportunities in investment markets, because things will plummet and then they will pick up again. They'll plummet and they'll pick up again. You really have to gain a sense of perspective. The size of the entire world's economy right now is roughly, I think, 80 to 90 trillion US dollars. The world has either 195 or 197 countries, depending on how you count certain jurisdictions. So roughly 200 countries. You add up all those countries, individual GDPs, and the numbers come to, like I said, between 80 and 90 trillion. As a result, in the last few months, as a result of the four largest central banks of the world, meaning the US Fed, the ECB, the European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan, the BOJ, and the BOE, the Bank of England, just these four central banks. If you add up the fiscal and monetary stimulus that has been announced, I think it comes to $8 trillion just to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. And they're not finished yet, because there's still a lot more work that needs to be done. That's 10% of the global economy. And a lot of this expansion is based on the creation of debt. So This is going to cause a greater destabilization of the world going forward. But the people who carry no debt, who have no monthly payments going out to various banks or to various service providers, they get to keep their own money. And if they get to keep their own money, they get to actually just spend their own money. So quality of life can actually go up. But in the long term, in the short term, if you want quality of life to go up, you just borrow like there's no tomorrow. And so very few people worldwide, and even very few people amongst those who are listening to this event, watching this event live, and the far more people who are going to watch the recording of this over the next, let's say, 6 months or so, very few of them are actually going to take this advice to heart. I recognize that. But those few who actually do something about it, they build enormous emergency buffers, not based on overdrafts or lines of credit, but actual cash that is set aside. And those who work very, very hard to bring down their levels of debt, they will actually end up in much. I saw a certain question
Yes.
pertaining to the Yara announcement. It came up twice. I'd like to try and answer that from, is it Strappy Jones? Hi, Strappy.
Yeah.
Okay, hi, Rajan. I refer to your tweet on May 5th as below. So obviously, I've forgotten that I tweeted that. So Strappy, thank you for reminding me. Bank Negara Malaysia has lowered Malaysia's key interest rate by 0.5 percentage point today. Good for borrowers, bad for savers, and it could be great for bond and REIT investors. Would it be possible to shed some insight on this, and how can investors use this opportunity during the crisis? Okay. Thank you, Strappy. I had a very, very interesting, I was going to say Zoom, but it was actually a WebEx meeting last night with two of my current financial planning consulting clients. And normally we have face-to-face meetings. I'm based in Seremban. They live in Sungai Buloh. So normally I'll drive there and we'll sit down and have dinner and then we'll have a meeting. But obviously because of this whole MCO business, we can't do that. So we had a virtual meeting. And I was explaining to my clients that each time Bank Negara drops the most important interest rate in Malaysia, which is known as the OPR, the overnight policy rate, what happens is our fixed deposit rates actually come down. And while for my own money, I tend to pump money into a savings and investment portfolio that actually stretches across 5 different asset classes. There's cash, as in money in the bank, money in money market. There's fixed income, that would be bonds. So I use bond funds. Equities, which would be stocks. So I have direct stocks, local, international. I've also got equity funds, local, international. And then investment real estate. Now, in the past, I've actually had brick and mortar, but I'm one of the, I guess, minority that actually had it up with a lot of grief. And I found that for my personality, I'd much rather not have to deal with tenants, and I'd much rather just own REITs, real estate investment trusts. So with REITs, many years ago, I actually owned every listed REIT in Malaysia. I bought everything, very small positions, but everything to have them on the radar screen. And now for myself, as well as for my clients, I put them into a couple of international REITs. There's one REIT that is regional, that covers the Asia Pacific. There's another REIT that is global. So where was I? Cash, fixed income, equities, investment real estate, and then alternatives. There are all kinds of alternative investments. Hedge funds would be one of them, but those are not available in Malaysia. Most Malaysians used to be able to just stroll into Singapore if they wanted to, but our borders are now closed. But Singapore sells hedge funds. Other alternative investments would be structured products that insurance companies put together. Derivatives that Warren Buffett has actually referred to as toxic weapons of mass destruction. He wrote about that, and then when I read the statement, the shareholders' letter the following year, derivatives remained as toxic weapons of mass destruction. But because Buffett is Buffett and he's far smarter than pretty much anyone else, he made a fortune from derivatives. But I find derivatives very, very scary. There are lots of other things, foreign exchange, for instance, and PE, private equity. This PE is not price earnings ratio, it's private equity. But my favorite form of alternative investments is actually commodities, because of the demographic swing that I was talking about, that there are going to be more and more people in the world over the next 80 years. The median age of the planet is going to grow larger and larger, as in the world is graying, it's aging. Okay, look at my gray hair here. So the world's coming my way, graying. And as this happens, the per capita wealth of an individual is also going to rise, which means that the consumption habits are going to change. So I think all of this augurs very well for equities in the long run and for commodities in the long run. But with interest rates coming down, and in the developed world, I think Trump is being irresponsible in pushing for the US to move to negative interest rates. And Jerome Powell, who is the chairman of the US Fed, thus far has actually stayed firm. You may be able to tell I'm not a Donald Trump fan. It's just unfortunate, I think, that because he's the most powerful individual on the planet, that the people who will decide who has his finger on the red button, as it were, is not the rest of the world. It's actually the American populace, less than 5% of the entire global population. But unless a miracle happens, I think Trump's actually going to win again in November, which I'm very, very sad about. When I talk to some of my American friends, and some don't, and I'm sure it's going to happen here, but I'm not a fan. I think he's dangerous, but I think more than likely we're going to end up with Donald Trump for another 4.5 years. So God help us all. Personal responsibility becomes even greater. So as interest rates come down, you've got to look at your diversified portfolio. And if it's very rare for us to be able to say, I know where interest rates are going to go. But right now, we all know interest rates are going down. And therefore, what we should actually do is look at the intrinsic behavior of different asset classes to see which ones happen to have an inverse relationship to interest rate directions. And financial theory, which is borne out in financial fact, actually tells us that when interest rates go up, bond prices fall. When interest rates go up, REITs fall. But right now, interest rates are coming down, and therefore bond prices are rising and REITs are rising as well. Now, this is not a one-way street. Eventually, one would hope interest rates start to go up again, and when they do, then the REITs and the bonds will come down to some extent. But I think we're going to end up with lower for longer. My financial planning license, which comes from the Malaysian Securities Commission, is through my financial planning principal company, Manulife Investment Management Malaysia Berhad, very long name. But the official Manulife view on everything that's been going on recently, particularly in light of the pandemic, is lower for longer. And I remember when I read that and I heard it, I said, absolutely right. So we're looking at interest rates to be lower and longer, lower for a longer period. Therefore, in Malaysia, we have a saying, FD kakis. Kaki is the Malay word leg. And it's also your kaki would be your friend. So FD friends, fixed deposits. Or if you're listening in North America, then it would be CDs, certificates of deposit. So if your annual yield is coming down, and let's say in the old days, you were actually able to get 5% on your FDs, and now you're down to sub 2%. The last FD I opened, and yes, I do keep money in fixed deposits for different purposes. Like my tax money, I park there so that I ring fence it. So when the Malaysian government says, come and pay me because I have no money, I will just pay in one go. I have found over many years of being in business that one of the biggest stresses in life is not having all the money available when the tax department says, pay me now. And so life's too short. Just set the money aside and I focus on growing what is mine. There is an old there's an old verse from the Bible. Jesus said, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's and unto God that which is God's. And that was his reaction when people were saying, should we go pay taxes? And so I must pay taxes. No one's going to be happy about it, but unless you want to get thrown in prison, go pay your taxes, but set it aside first, and then work on growing stuff. So to answer, what was it? Was it
Strappy?
Strappy Jones, right? So because FT rates are coming down, in the old days, if you had R1 million in fixed deposits and you were earning 5%, you could actually get a pretty much risk-free yield of 5%. So it's 50,000 ringgit a year, which in Malaysia is not too bad. Of course, by the time you convert that to US dollars, it's hardly any money. But Malaysia is a fantastic place. It's so cheap in so many ways. But right now, the last fixed deposit I opened was 1.7%, but that's with a foreign bank, and they don't really need the money, so they keep the rates low. You might be able to get maybe 1.8, 1.9, maybe even 2. And if you are a retiree, maybe they'll throw in a little bit extra, maybe 2.1, 2.2. But let's say you get 2%. On R1 million, 2%, you'll only get 20,000 ringgit a year. Very, very tough. So I think it actually makes sense for people who are FD kakis to seriously think about enhancing the yield that they can actually get and to take advantage, to harness the opportunities that are available from falling interest rates. And I think 2 specific asset classes that they should look at would be bonds and REITs. So I hope that actually helps. Now, how do you actually go about getting such help? I would recommend that if you have, if you're very wealthy and you have a private banker, then you go talk to your private banker. Alternatively, if you're not super, super wealthy, but you have a relationship manager in your bank, maybe go there. If you have unit trust consultants that you trust, then go talk to your unit trust consultant, not just about buying equities, but buying a broad-based, diversified portfolio. And when you're interviewing people, try and find out whether they at least know basic things like the inverse relationship between interest rates and bonds and REITs. Or you can go and check out licensed financial planners. So there are people available, but the smartest thing that most of us can actually do is to go and talk to people who we know within our circle who are more successful at money and ask them, do you have a licensed financial planner that you trust? Do you have a trusted unit trust advisor that you trust? Do you have an insurance agent that you trust? One who isn't trying to shove product down your throat, but is actually very, very concerned about understanding you and helping you meet your needs. And then so you talk to your friends, get referrals, and then maybe interview 2 or 3 or 4 people. The other option, of course, is to do the normal Google search. So let's say you happen to be listening in Singapore, you would type in financial planners in Singapore. You're in Malaysia, financial planners in Malaysia, that kind of stuff. Hopefully that helps. For Inez, financial planners in Brazil.
Okay, Rajen, that's very interesting. I just want to bring back to the point that you mentioned earlier about the way that the economy is set up based upon debt, meaning to say that our GDP is based upon the amount of money that we borrow, and from what we borrow, we spend, and that drives GDP. So when you mention that, it comes to mind that because it is set up in such a way, the regular people, they get into the mindset of, they get into the personal habits of borrowing and spending. And this is not going to be very healthy, especially in the current time. So what would be the new financial habits that people need to make, the changes that the people need to make in order to get themselves out of this? Because you mentioned about the 2 common denominators, and the reason why many people are not having those low debt or large EBF is because they have these consumer habits rather than I would say a grower in terms of financial health. So what personal finance habits should regular people put in place this year under the current circumstances?
I'll answer that, Mazuki, but I just want to clarify one thing. You said earlier, actually quoting me, that GDP depends upon us borrowing money and then buying stuff. But please be aware that when you're actually looking at contributors to GDP, when you look at the actual calculations, you will find that there is a contribution from government, there is a contribution from business, and then there is a contribution from regular households, real people. And then I think there is a fourth quantity, which is a balancing figure. So anyone who wants to do like a Wikipedia search on GDP, you'll be able to see the four components. Now, here I'm talking about the dependence upon debt to expand the GDP. So many governments borrow a lot, and they use that. Let's say they have a budget deficit, as Malaysia very often has a budget deficit. They borrow, and then they are able to spend money. Corporates throughout Asia, because of the extreme shock that we went through during the Asian financial crisis, many Asian corporates are actually in better shape than other corporates elsewhere, because we went through the pain and we cleaned up our balance sheet. So for companies that have relatively low levels of debt, not a problem. But on the consumer side, especially in Malaysia, our household debt is enormous. So GDP growth isn't just on debt. That people also have money, real money, that they go and spend. So if everybody were to suddenly say, okay, I'm not going to borrow any money, I'm not going to borrow to spend. If everyone did that, the entire economy would collapse. Like the whole economy would collapse. But it's not going to happen. Very, 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 very few people are going to take this advice. But those who do, they will find that there are two particular skills that will allow them to evolve under this new paradigm, this new framework. They need to exercise what is called delayed gratification. And they need to start using a written budget. Many of us have a budget up in our head, more or less. But the moment you have a written budget using pen and paper, okay? Or what's more likely, just power up your computer and put together something on an Excel spreadsheet. Or you can just use your smartphone and use some kind of budgeting app. Doesn't really matter. But put in place a written budget. Many people who are quite serious about managing their money better will listen to me, say, yeah, I'll get around to it, and then not do anything. Too bad. But for the few of you who are very serious, get your written budget started today. If you wait till tomorrow, you won't do anything. Start now. In your budget, you will have one line item at the top which says, this is the money I have. And then you'll have a whole bunch of things that you spend money on. Okay, get your written budget today. Yeah, it's cool. Or perhaps, Anas, would you be kind enough to switch that around to get your budget written today? That would be better. Okay, and what you want to do is to exercise delayed gratification. Economists understand that there are actually two predispositions. Get your budget written today. Looks good. Yeah, thank you so much. For those of you who don't know, Anas is Mazuki's son, and he is our backroom person today, and he's doing a really good job. So, if you can, just thank him as well. He's doing a very good job. Yes, I think. Okay, delayed gratification, immediate gratification. Immediate gratification says, I want it, I deserve it, and I want it now. I don't have the money, but not a problem. Everyone wants to lend me money. I will borrow money and go buy something fancy. That's immediate gratification. Delayed gratification is, I can afford a Camry today, just as an example. I can afford a Camry today. I can put down a certain amount of money, and I can borrow a little bit of money. But I can afford the payments. But I actually have enough money to buy a Vios for cash. And so delayed gratification would be a case of, I'd like to have the Camry, but I don't really want the payments. Maybe I buy something cheaper. Or I want to buy, I'm using like cars that are commonplace on Malaysian roads. I want to buy a Myvi, and it's very common. Pretty much all of us will borrow money to buy a house, borrow money to buy a car. We'll take personal loans. We'll take credit card loans. One of the biggest missteps of previous administrations in Malaysia, I think has actually been the excessive push into the national car industries, because as a result of that, we put up barriers and we made cars so expensive because we were trying to protect our own industries that many Malaysians, I mean, I think it is insane. Many Malaysians right now take out car loans for 7 years, 8 years, 9 years. Think about it. If you take out a loan for a house, most of the time real estate goes up in value. The moment you take out a loan for a car, the moment you drive that new car out of the lot, the value drops. So I'm going to be very unpopular, but not a problem. In this very, very short time where I'm actually telling people, you're working 40 hours, I want you in the next several months to ramp it up, get another job, start a side gig, start an online business, go sell ikan bakar once the police make sure don't stop you for doing stuff on the roads, etc. Work harder, but spend less. That will actually create a larger surplus between cash in and cash out. Manage that surplus well. Pay down your debts as fast as you possibly can. There are several strategies that will actually work in that regard. One of them is known as high to low. The other one is known as small to big. High to low means you take all your debts and you rank them based on the interest rate that you're paying. But you must make sure that the interest rate is moved back to what's known as APR, annualized percentage rate, so that you're comparing apples and apples and not apples and oranges. The other strategy is to actually rank all your debts from smallest amount owed to second smallest, third, all the way down to the largest, and then to meet all your minimum payments, and then to squeeze some money out from your budget and to target and to pay down the smallest loan first. Because it's small, it disappears very fast. Now, the Americans call the small to low the debt snowball. Debt snowball. And the debt snowball is outstanding. There are actually some actually very, very good teaching online from an American financial talk show host. His name is Dave Ramsey. I'm going to type this in here so that Anas can actually type out his name, Dave Ramsey. So Anas, just show that up. So you'll get the name in a moment. What you can do is you just go to YouTube and you type Dave Ramsey and you just have a listen. Now, he's very, very, very tough. He may not be, his personality may not match up to what you like, but what he talks about when it comes to the debt snowball, let me also type that in so it's easier. The debt snowball, which is actually what debt snowball, what I actually talk about, the small to big strategy for paying down. Okay, so what you do is you go to YouTube, go type in Dave Ramsey, do a search on debt snowball, talk about it. It's very, very interesting. But I've actually helped my own clients either using the debt snowball, small to big strategy for paying down. Okay, Anas, thank you very much. Very clear. I hope you guys find that useful. You might want to take a picture of that so you get it done. Mazuki, does that help? Have I given
yes. Yes, that's very helpful because we are coming to the end of the interview already. I can say that to me it has been very interesting, very enlightening, because what you are bringing forward here is just like the bitter pill that we need to swallow, because if we continue to be behaving in the ways that we have been behaving before, then this crisis is going to crush us. So especially when you mention about putting in more hours of work, and that is not popular. It's not nice to hear for many people. However, if that is what is going to get us out stronger, then that is something that we want to latch on. Budgeting, it's not something that we have never heard before. It's just that we've just been putting it away. and thank you for giving those hard-hitting advice that I believe that we need to take up in order for us to be able to emerge stronger from this, because it is not just about surviving. Yes, the first part is survival. The next part is to be able to grow from here. So, and as we, especially for people who are very tight right now, yes, we are talking about we want to be able to survive. However, we want to keep an eye on our habits, because the people who have low debt and large EBF, they have certain habits in their lives that cause them to be able to have that kind of situation. So it's about getting in the right habits. And so I really value what you have mentioned towards the last part of the interview, the specific behaviors that we need to come up with that will get us into the right habits of having the two common denominators, so that we'll be able to thrive in the years to come. So since there is another question from Strappy Jones, I hope that you can take another minute or so to answer this. Is keeping cash in Amanah Saham Malaysia for non-Bumi Putras considered a cash asset class or investment asset class, Rajen?
Actually, a really good question, because of the weird way that PNB works, and so for Bumi Putras, I'll answer that first, then I'll come to Strappy's question. For Bumi Putras in Malaysia, ASB is quite an interesting product. This ASB and then this ASB2. And when people put money in ASB, I consider that cash. But for non-Bumis, actually ASM, Amanah Saham Malaysia, is open to everybody. For that, and then I think there are other funds like Wawasan, etc. If you have a dollar value and it is guaranteed by PNB, backed by the government, and you know that it's going to stay at $1, then I would assume it is cash. But if you actually have some of the other PNB funds and also the private funds outside that fluctuate, and they may basically be money in bonds, money in equities, money in investment real estate, money in commodities, whatever else it may be, that I would consider to be an investment in different classes. Now, so Strappy, I hope that helps you. What I want you to take away from this is that while I have come across sounding very, very hard, the purpose is not to hammer people. The purpose is basically to try and inject a sense of hope. There is hope. There is hope when we actually exercise wisdom in following principles that work in good times and in bad times. Right now, we're in bad times. And I talked about the importance of paying down your debt, trying to go to low debt, ideally no debt at all, and also building an emergency buffer. Now, in good times, when you follow those strategies, when you heed those principles, you will do well. But in bad times, you will do phenomenally well. And so I want you to if there is a recording on this, maybe listen again, take down notes, ask other people who might find it helpful to do so. What you want to do is to try and gain access to resources, and you want to learn. Nobody cares about your financial success more than you do. Mazuki, I gave access to some free resources. Would you pass that on later? Can I also just let people know, for people in the Malaysian context, okay? Right. So what you see right now is freecoolarticles. Freecoolarticles.com is one of my two sites. The other one is rajendevadason.com. freecoolarticles.com/financialplanning.htm should take you to a page with about 50 articles and sub-articles I've written. Long time ago, quite old, quite dated, but hopefully the principles are solid. I also write the financial planning column for the New Sunday Times. I've done it now for 4 years plus, almost 5 years. So if you do a Google search on NST or NSTP, New Straits Times Press, New Straits Times, and Rajen Devadason, you should be taken to that page. Better still, go buy the paper. I'm sure the paper would love people to buy it. I write for the Sunday Times, so it comes out on Sunday. On Monday onward or whatever, you can do a search and you can just read the stuff online, and there's also back archives. Malaysia's, in my opinion, Malaysia's most intelligent radio station is actually BFM, Business FM. In terms of direct broadcast, it's only available in the Klang Valley. But in 2008, when BFM first started, I was the first financial planner interviewed on air. And they have kept interviewing me. So I think there are more than 50 interviews, and they've got this great podcast system. So you can go to BFM, go look at the podcast bit, search my name, and you'll be able to just have a look and see whether there are things there that I discussed that will be helpful to you. Let's see. Strappy Jones. Hi, Rajan. I want to take Zolly. Thank you. Oh, podcast. Okay, there you go. No, the BFM only started. Oh, you've been listening to 2010. I started 2008. Okay. Ringgit Sands, download it, and I keep replaying. Oh, well, God bless you too, Strappy, and you're very welcome. Mazuki, you want to wrap up?
Yes. Yes. So I would just like to say thank you very much. For me, it's very enlightening. You gave the right advice that I can personally take and put into practice, and I hope that our viewers have taken serious consideration of what you have and to take action from that. And that is what the intention of this interview about, bringing in specialist knowledge for people who are specialized in their particular area, to give us the right information. Because, for example, in the area of finance, many of us, me included, I've gone through the, I would say, bad financial habits because we've been operating from the wrong information, the habits of borrowing, the habits of consuming, that is preventing us from having that financial strength. So thank you very much for being with us for 1 hour 20 minutes. So thank you very much, Rajan. I really appreciate
it's such a good time. Thank you, Mazuki. Thank you, Anas. And for people who actually wrote in, Strappy, thanks. Inez, hi. Bhavani, I saw. I'm not sure how many other people are around, but I had so much fun. So thank you so much. Bye-bye. Take care.
Yeah, thank you. So before we wrap up this interview, just an announcement of our next session. Our next interview will be tomorrow evening. It will be tomorrow evening. We will be starting at 9 in the evening. The topic of the interview is reliefs for SMEs affected by COVID-19. So another angle, financial angle, and this will be given by Mr. Muazzam Muhammad, the CEO of Bank Islam. So if you are SME, and the recent terminology that I learned is not just small, medium enterprise, small, medium, and micro enterprises. So what do the banking industry have that can help us? So I hope that I'll see you tomorrow evening. And with that, again, Rajan, my greatest gratitude to you for being here. And for those of you who are here, thank you very much for being here. And I hope that you can share the recording of this interview with your friends, so that more people can benefit from the gems that Rajan has shared with us. I say gems because it's something that should be common knowledge, but not commonly known, and very useful. So thank you very much again, Rajan, and to all of you here, thank you very much. May your lives be all the better from what we have shared. So with that, thank you, and I hope to see you in the next sessions.
Take care. And Ines, thank you for the nice note. Azuki, thank you. Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.